Hello all you keen historians out there, and welcome to your second lesson of the Sources tab of the Industrial Revolution Teaching and Learning website resource, Analysing Sources. Last lesson we looked at the difference between primary and secondary sources in this lesson above, but in this lesson we're going to look at what it is to analyse a source and how to analyse sources. So your learning intention and success criteria for this lesson. So by the end of this lesson you need to know source analysis in history. By the end of the lesson, you need to be able to think about and explain what historical sources reveal about the past. So source analysis is a bit harder than identifying whether the source is primary or secondary. You have to look at the source and think about it deeply in order to understand what the source is telling you. Your task for this lesson is all in your workbook. So what you're going to do is you're going to copy this table below and pretty much fill it out. So these are the 6 things you need to do. So you need to find the title of the source, write a description on what the source is, find when it was produced, who made the source, state whether it is a primary or secondary source, and say what it can tell you about the past. And we've got several sources here. We've got a diary entry, a cartoon, a painting, we've got a documentary, we've got another painting here, we've got an extract from a book by John C. Cobden, of a boy called John Gibb, talking about working conditions for kids during the Industrial Revolution. We've got a photograph, we've got a political poster, we've got a illustration or a drawing, again from John C. Cobden's book, The White Slaves of England. And then we've got a graph that shows carbon emissions in the United Kingdom since the start of the Industrial Revolution to the end of the Industrial Revolution. So a pretty groundbreaking graph there. So I'll show you the table you need to copy. So start off by copying this table in your workbook, and I've done the first source as an example for you. So you need to do all these sources in the table, and I'll explain them all to you now. So the first one I've done for you is a diary entry of a World War I fighter pilot, and it's written by Charles Wright. He was the World War I fighter pilot, and it was made between 1916 and 1917. And again, I've done this one as an example. So let's have a look at what I've written. So the source title is a diary entry of a World War I fighter pilot. The source description is the notes that a pilot kept during World War I. So see how the answer's not here anywhere. I've had to look at that source and think about it. When was it produced? It was produced between 1916 and 1917. It says that in the source description. Who produced it? Charles Wright. Is it a primary or secondary source? I said primary because he was there and saw what he wrote about. He was there during World War I and wrote about what he saw. And what can it tell me? So it can tell me what it was like at the time and what it was like to fly a plane during World War I. Now that's probably the hardest column to fill out, that last one. Let's do the second one together now too, guys. So the cartoon, A Court for King Cholera by John Leach, sketched in 1852. Let's have a read of the description here. This cartoon was created during the Industrial Revolution and highlights why cholera spread so rapidly in London. So cholera was a disease, it was a waterborne disease that was in people's drinking water, and people lived really like dirty lives. There was open sewerage, minimal sanitation. You can see like people throwing their waste, their excrement out the window. You can see kids playing in the dirt with rubbish, people looking through the rubbish. People packed so close together in really dirty looking conditions. So that's pretty much why cholera spread so much. So let's answer this table together. So the title of the source is called A Court for King Cholera. They called it King Cholera because they felt that it ruled their lives more than the actual monarchy during the time. Source description. So I would say that this source is a cartoon, a political cartoon that pretty much outlines why cholera spread so much. When was it produced? We've got here 1852 was when it was made, so that's a pretty easy one. Who produced it is John Leach. Primary or secondary? It's a primary source. It was made by someone who lived during the Industrial Revolution in London and obviously would have seen this to then create a cartoon about it. So of course, that's a first-hand account of the past. It must be a primary source. And what can it tell me? So this can tell me that cholera spread because people lived in such dirty conditions. You've got kids playing in the dirt, and the mess. You've got open sewerage, people, tipping their excrement out windows. And then we've got people sifting through rubbish as well, and really dirty, unsanitary living conditions. People also packed so close together contributes to the spread of cholera. So that's what I write in what the source can tell me. Now this next one, we've got a painting of downtown London in the 1800s. It was painted by an unknown artist during the 1800s. So again, a little bit of information there. I'm going to have a quick look at the source first. I can tell how open the roads are. I can tell everyone was travelling by horse and cart. We've got some advertising and some shops around the side here. So that's really an insight into what London looked like during the 1800s. A little bit conflicting to this cartoon here as well. So I'd estimate that this is probably at the start of the 1800s because it looks a little bit cleaner. However, the artist could have been a little bit biased and made London look a little bit better than it actually was. But we just need to consider those things when we're analysing sources. So the title of the source, I just call it Painting of Downtown London. The source description is a painting of what the streets of London looked like during the 1800s. That's what I'd say for that one there. When was the source produced? We've only got the date here of the 1800s, so that's all we can go off. So I would have to say the 1800s. Who produced it? It says an unknown artist. So we have to put that one there. That's all the information gives us. It's a primary source because it was made during the 1800s, and it must have been made by an artist who was there to see what London looked like during the 1800s, so it must be a primary source. And what can the source tell me? Well, really, it can tell me what London would have looked like during the 1800s. People travelling horse and cart, the types of clothes people wore, the types of buildings, the architecture, the types of advertising, those sorts of things as well. We've also got different types of carts, and you can tell kind of different social classes of people with your more well-dressed people with their top hats compared to like people like sweeping, some people not wearing shoes, carrying baskets of food, those sorts of things. So we'll go to our next source now. So here we've got a documentary on the steam engine and workplace conditions during the Industrial Revolution, made by Real Truth History. So what I want you to do for this one is click on the actual video and then go into it by clicking on the YouTube button. And then we're going to find out our information here. Now, this is good if you want to reference a video for any of your assessment tasks or anything, or further down the line in history. You actually need to be good at going and finding the information of who made these sources. So, what do we need to answer first? We need the source title. So, the source title is this one here, Private Life of the Industrial Revolution, Steam Engine. That's the title of the documentary. Source description, well, we've got that a little bit here in the actual source description. We've got a documentary on the steam engine and then workplace conditions for people during the Industrial Revolution. And there's also, if you click on show more, you've got a bit more of a description there that you could put in. Next one, guys, when was it produced? Now, we've got to look at the date here. The 26th of November 2018 was when it was produced. Who produced it? We've got Real Truth History Documentaries. That's who produced it. Is it a primary or secondary source? It is a documentary, so it's a secondary source. It's about the Industrial Revolution, but was only made in 2018, so it is a reconstruction of the past. What can this source tell me? Well, it can tell me how the steam engine was invented, the impact of the steam engine. It also can tell you a little bit about work conditions for people who lived during the Industrial Revolution. So that's that one there, guys. Next, we've got another painting. So I've got a painting of inside a factory during the Industrial Revolution created by Hermann Heidenbrock in 1890, which is the main cover for our website as well. So here we've got some sort of factory. It doesn't say what type of factory it is, but obviously it involves like hot metal. So it could be a car factory or a train factory or a locomotive factory would be my estimate. So our first one here, our source title. All you've got to go off here is a painting of inside a factory during the Industrial Revolution. That's what I'd put as the title because that's the only information I have. The source description, I would say this source is a painting of what the inside of a factory would have looked like during the Industrial Revolution. I don't want to go too much because I want to save some answers for what can it tell me. When was it produced? 1890. Who produced it? We've got Hermann here, so we'd put him in there. Is it a primary or secondary source? I'd say it is a primary source. Hermann must have been there, have been in one of these factories to have seen what they look like and made a painting about it. So that's a first-hand account of the past, so that is a primary source. What can it tell me? Well, for one, it can tell me what the inside of a factory looked like. It can also tell me how there was kind of like a lack of safety and protection for these workers. You've got hot metal and fire around here, yet look how close they are to it. You can also see the types of clothes that the working class wore as well. And you can see the types of jobs they did in factory and some of the really heavy equipment that was in factories as well. Probably I'd note the safety as well, or probably most prominently. Guys, our next source here, we've got a boy named John Gibb who lived during the Industrial Revolution, describing what it was like to work in a textile factory during the time. John's statement is found in an extract from John C. Cobden's 1854 book, The White Slaves of England. So, here, let's read the source before we begin. Really important when you're doing written sources, you read them first before answering the questions. So we've got here, John Gibb, 11 years old, solemnly sworn, deposes that he has been about 3 years a piecer in one of the spinning rooms, that the heat and confinement makes his feet sere, and makes him sick and have headaches, and he often has a stitch in his side, that he is now much paler than he used to be, that he receives 4 shillings a week, which he gives to his mother, that he is very desirous of short hours, that he might go to school more than he can do at present, that the spinners often lick him when he is in fault with taws of leather. So that means they hit him or whip him with leather when he does the wrong thing or when he might stuff something up. So the source title, I'd call it John Gibb's deposition or statement about working conditions during the Industrial Revolution. Source description, so this source is a boy telling us what it was like to work in a textile factory during the Industrial Revolution. When was it produced? The only date we have to go off is 1854. Who produced it? Now, for this you can put John Gibb technically contributed to this source because it's his words, but you would also say John C. Cobden because it's found in his book. So you can put both in there. Is it a primary source? It is a primary source. John Gibb was there during the Industrial Revolution, worked in those factories, suffered in them, and then can tell us what it was like to work in them. What can it tell me? Well, it can tell me the working conditions for kids during the Industrial Revolution. It tells you how much they were paid, how the type of work and the confinement and the heat gave him headaches and made him feel sick, that what little money he earned he gave to his mother to support his family, and he actually wanted to go to school more, and then he was hit and whipped when he did the wrong thing. Couple to go, guys, 4 to go. We've got a photograph taken in 1918 by Lewis Hine, very famous photographer, of 3 teenagers working in a mine during the Industrial Revolution. That would be my title. That would be my exact title. Source description, I would just say this photograph is of 3 teenagers who are working in a mine during the Industrial Revolution. I wouldn't want to give too much away because I want to save a few answers for what it can tell me. When was it produced? I've got here 1911. We've got that there. Who produced it? Lewis Hine took the photo, so he is the owner or the creator of that source. Primary or secondary source is a primary source. It's a photograph. Lewis Hine was there. Those teenage boys were there during the Industrial Revolution. So it's a first-hand account of the past, so it is a primary source. What can it tell me? Well, it can tell me a little bit about how old some of the miners were. It can also tell me that horses and donkeys were in mines. It also gives me an insight into the type of equipment and clothing, and then but it was mainly kids who worked in mines as well. Here we've got a political cartoon created by the Conservative Party in 1909 of socialism represented as a beast choking Britain. The Conservative Party made this because they wanted to tell people that socialism would kill Britain. So that's a very politically charged poster. There's a lot behind that, but we explore that a bit more in impacts on society. And so essentially these rich capitalists were scared of socialism and how power to the people would overturn their society, which it would, and kind of did. So the source title, I would say a political cartoon created by the Conservative Party as socialism as a beast choking Britain. That's what I would put for that one there. Source description. So I would say in the source you can see that socialism is represented by like a very threatening looking beast standing over the Union Jack, so Britain, and it is choking Britain there, represented as a woman. When was it produced? Here we've got to go back down to the date, is 1909. As it is a primary source, it is also who produced the Conservative Party. It's a primary source because it gives us an insight into the minds of people and what the sort of the wealthy, the upper class were thinking about the changing society they were living in towards the end of the Industrial Revolution. and it was made during the very late Industrial Revolution, so it is a primary source. What can it tell me? I've kind of given that a little bit away. It shows how politicians and the upper class were threatened by socialism, and they wanted people to be scared of it. They wanted the working class to be scared of it. However, it was the working class that were really charging the socialism movement. And next source, guys, we've got an illustration of 3 young children working in a coal mine during the Industrial Revolution from John C. Cobden's 1854 book, The White Slaves of England. We've actually got a title here. So Thrusters and Trappers is the title of this illustration. Our source description, I would say that the source is an illustration that shows what thrusters and trappers were. So a thruster is someone who, or like typically kids, who would push these big carts, and then trappers were the kids who opened and closed the mining shafts, or the doors to the mining shafts. And next one here, when was it produced? Well, we've got our only date here is 1854. It was found in his book. John C. Cobden is who produced it as well. Now, is this a primary or secondary source? Now, I've done my research on John C. Cobden, and he never went down into a mine. However, he did make this source. He did draw this illustration. So this is a secondary source because while he lived during the Industrial Revolution, he wasn't there to get a first-hand account of what mines were like for kids. He's only used other primary sources to draw this drawing. So this one is actually a secondary source. What can it tell me? Well, it can tell me how old some of the miners were, that they were very young kids, and the types of jobs they did. So, for instance, thrusters were people who pushed the mining carts for the coal, and the trappers were the kids who opened and closed the doors to the mining shafts. Last one here, guys. We've got a graph created by the Global Carbon Project in 2019 showing the United Kingdom's carbon emissions from 1751 to 1912. So you can see here really that this graph tells you that since the advent or the dawn of the Industrial Revolution, carbon emissions have just exploded because of coal and steam power, and some of those technologies that are still used today. So this is really where carbon emissions started, and you can see they grew exponentially. So let's go back up to here. We've got the source title. We've got to scroll all the way down here. Annual CO2 emissions between 1751 to 1912. That is our title. Source description. The source is a graph that shows the amount of carbon emissions that the United Kingdom produced between these years here. Who made it? We've got the Global Carbon Project is the source here. You can see that here, Global Carbon Project. When was it made? It was made in 2019. It is a secondary source. It uses data to put this reconstruction of the past together. So it is a secondary source. And what this source can tell me is that carbon emissions really exploded since the start of the Industrial Revolution. And you have inventions like the steam locomotive and the steam engine, and then powering factories and machines through coal. You really get this explosion of the amount of carbon emissions that the United Kingdom was producing. So guys, that's pretty much all your answers for this task here. I hope it was a valuable task for you and that you learn a bit about source analysis, where you just can't look at the source. The answer's not going to jump out. You've got to think about the source, maybe even research it and think about it critically to get the answer. So thanks for your attention and your engagement in that task, guys. If you like using this website or you want to stay updated to any new lessons that are made or any new websites that are made, please go ahead and subscribe. Thank you.